Good evening. Thank you all for having me. My name is Trevor Collier. As Father Gene said, I want to share with you some. There's a survey of economists that's happened over many decades. The data starts in about 1990, and the most recent survey was in 2021. And so I'm going to share some of that data with you. And then I copied those questions and sent them out to, I believe many of you have seen the survey, filled out the survey, and other members of our community. And so we'll do a little compare and contrast of sort of the community's views on some of these policy statements relative to economists' views on some of these policy statements. There's some differences, but there's also some similarities that we'll share. So first, I wanted to share a little bit about myself. As I said, my name is Trevor Collier. I grew up. Bottom left is a picture of Louisville, Kentucky, where I was born and raised and lived until I went to college. Went to college in the top right at a small school in Kentucky called Center College. It's a small liberal arts school, supposedly in the geographic center of the state. I played soccer in center and studied economics. So that's where I fell in love with economics, and one of my faculty members convinced me that I should continue the study of economics and go on to graduate school. It's grad school on the bottom right, which is Southern Methodist University, or SMU, in Dallas, Texas. So I have a bachelor's in economics, a master's in economics, and a PhD in economics. It's pretty boring. The only thing I like is economics. And then right above SMU is a picture from UD's campus. This is finishing my 17th year at the University of Dayton. So I came here to teach economics. Did that for many years. I chaired the Department of Economics and Finance at UD for a couple years. And now I serve as Dean of the Business School at UD in my third year in that role. So this is the type of slide I used to show to my students on the first day of class. And I want to show it tonight while I'm putting forth the idea that there's a lot of similarity. I know anytime you talk about policy, government policy, public policy, people can get a little amped up. So I want you to know who I am outside of this room, that while I am an economics professor and a dean, I'm not really here in that capacity. I'm a father, I'm a husband. So this is my family here in the middle. Last summer, we took an RV trip from Dayton to Maine. So this is in Bar Harbor, Maine, when we got there. It was a really fun trip. Love the outdoors. So there's a picture of me snowboarding and a picture of me playing golf with my dad and my oldest son. So the question that I am starting with is are we living in a polarized country? So we see this in the media pretty regularly. We hear about it on television. We see it in social media. People are talking about how there's this huge split, and we can't get along. We can't agree on things. I'm gonna try to argue a little bit of the opposite tonight. And yes, surely there are some splits and there are some disagreements, but I think underneath all of that, there's actually more alignment than we might think. So this is this chart. It's a little busy for a slide, but it is showing the perception gap. So this is based on your political views. So on the far right is very devoted conservatives. On the far left, very devoted progressive, the term that they're using here. And this is the difference between somebody who's a far right conservative in what they think a progressive thinks and what that progressive actually thinks, right? So the further your political ideology is to the winning, the further off you are on what the other party actually thinks and believes, right? And so I think that drives a lot of the polarization, is not actually understanding what the other person thinks. It's what you've been told they think, or you assume they think because they're X, Y, or Z, they must think this thing, and it's not actually accurate. So those people who are the least politically engaged and those people that are moderate in a political scale actually have the best idea of what the different parties are actually believing in. So I told you there's two surveys that I want to talk about tonight. So one survey is this survey of economists. I'm using the data from 2021. So it's a survey of over 1,200 economists. And then I'm calling the St. Leonard survey. It is both individuals in this room and the broader community that received the survey that was sent out. And so if you look on a couple different demographic characteristics, there's some similarities and some big differences. The percent of our community survey and the percent of economists who identify as moderate is almost identical, right around 40%. And that's actually the same number in the greater population of the United States that identify as a moderate. So somewhat representative in that sense. The community survey, slightly more individuals or percentage of individuals identify as conservative or very conservative than in the economist survey. And the economist survey was predominantly male. It's a very male-dominated profession, although that's starting to change. My own department at UD, when I arrived, there was maybe one female amongst 8 or 9 male economists, and today we have 4 females among 10 economists. So it's growing, and hopefully we'll be balancing out more. The community survey was almost an even split. I did the initial analysis of the community survey last weekend. Okay, so I'm going to start with international trade, and I would say some history for you all. You all, many of you are maybe a little bit older than I am. That wasn't a joke. So I have to be careful telling you history, but from my history, for much of my life, there was some sort of consensus, at least discussed publicly, of politicians in support of free trade. Right? We were having more and more globalization, free trade, and in the last 5 to 10 years, that seems to have changed. And it was really, really surprising to me as an economist. As you can see on the left, this is the percentage of economists who, in the orange, the percentage of economists who agree with the statement that tariffs and import quotas usually reduce general economic welfare. Now, I'll give you another sidebar here about this survey. My wife actually writes surveys for a living. She does marketing research. And so before I sent out the survey, I said, hey, can you take a quick look at this before I send this out? Make sure I didn't do anything wrong. And she looks at it, she says, this survey is terrible. Who wrote this? And I didn't actually write it. I put the words in, but I mimicked what was in the survey that went out to economists. I wanted to make it identical so that I can compare apples to apples. The economist survey said you had 3 options for the given statement. One option was I agree. One option was I disagree. And another option was I agree with a proviso. My wife said, you have to delete that. Who knows what that means? That's nonsense. And so I changed it to somewhat agree. So that's what you all saw if you fill out the survey was agree, somewhat agree, or disagree. And so I lumped in agree and somewhat agree for you guys, and agree with proviso for the economists. But she also was angry at the statements that what is general economic welfare, right? Who knows what that means? So what I do, she said, you're weird economists, right? For a general audience, they're not going to know what that means. So I'm going to leave the words the same so that I can do the comparison. So I apologize if you fill out the survey and you thought, what is this crazy person asking me? I would have read them a little bit differently. So tariff and import quotas usually reduce general economic welfare means tariff and import quotas are bad. That's a general interpretation, right? A non-economist would say tariff and import quotas are bad. Or said another way, restrictions on trade are bad. It's essentially what we mean there. And you can see over 90% of economists agree with that. This is 2021. This is not that long ago. This is after we've kind of started decoupling, deglobalization, whatever you want to call it. Economists still think free trade is almost universally good, right? And the general audience in the community that received the survey is not that far off, right? 70%. And this is probably 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago, the university came and asked me to do, they do these 90-second lectures. And so they record one of the faculty talking in a video, and then they released it on their website and shared it out on YouTube. They said, we'd love to get you to do a 90-second lecture on economics. What would you like to talk about? And this is right as trade is starting to be contentious, and it's bizarre to me. And I said, oh, free trade, 100%. I know exactly what I'm going to talk about, and I know exactly how we're going to do it. We did this, what I thought was phenomenally done 90-second lecture, not phenomenally because I did it, but because the UD media people put together graphics and things on top of what I was saying that looked really neat. And I opened it with some statement about the last 2 presidential candidates. And when I went to the president of UD, he said, no, you can't release it. This is contentious. I sent him the survey. To me, it's not, look, I understand politics come into play. But this is, I'm leading with this because this is something that has puzzled me for many years now as how this has changed in the political lexicon that many people are opposed to trade. So again, I'm not here to share my own personal views, although I realize I probably just did a little bit there. I'm trying to share the views of economists. I'm happy to answer questions. You guys, I think, have note cards on your tables. If you want to write down questions when I'm finished, I'll come back to questions, and I'm happy to dig in deeper to any of these slides, but we'll keep moving on. A large balance trade deficit has an adverse effect on the economy. What is a balance of trade deficit? It's imports relative to exports, right? So if we export more than we import, we have a trade surplus, right? If we import more than we export, it's a deficit. And there's been a lot of conversation in the public about the deficit, and you can see the community, 80% of the community, over 80% of the community think a trade deficit's a bad thing. Not really so for economists. Some of them do. 35% of economists said this was a problem, which means 65% of economists don't think this is a problem, which is actually really strong because I'm lumping in agree with proviso that this is a bad statement. So 65% fully disagree that this is problematic. And so it's, when you think of trade, just as an economist, we don't think of trade as it's not really a zero-sum game, right? There's not one country wins and one country loses. We actually can both win from trade. We can both be better off from specialization and trade. You do what you're really good at, I do what I'm really good at, and then we can share with each other, and we're gonna be better off than if I try to do all the things, including things that I'm really terrible at. Inequality and mobility. So the state that I think everybody probably got this state. The distribution of income in the U.S. should be more equal. Most economists, most community agree with that statement. I don't think that's super contentious. The middle one is one that's more interesting to me. It's the Earned Income Tax Credit. This is often referred to as EITC. This is a program that operates through taxes that tries to encourage low-income individuals to enter the workforce and work. So if you do not work, you cannot get the Earned Income Tax Credit. If you work but make really low wages, they supplement your wages. So it's providing a bigger incentive to enter the workforce. If I had a graph here, I'd show you a graph of this. It's sort of the incentive goes up, and then there's sort of a plateau, and then it falls off. It was actually designed by economists. It's somewhat complicated. It's probably only negative to the EITC. is some people don't understand how it works. But you can see 90% of economists agree with this. I was actually pleased that 70% of this community agree with this. There are some negatives. I think the biggest negatives to the EITC are understanding it and even knowledge that it exists. Some people, there are individuals who are eligible for this but don't realize it, and so they don't earn the benefit. But again, the idea here is to encourage people to go to work and to help people that are making really low wages. The U.S. economy provides sufficient opportunities for social mobility. So this is, the American dream. Right? I was talking at dinner earlier. My last name, Collier, means coal miner. My grandfather and his grandfather were all coal miners. The dad was born in a town called Appalachia, Virginia. Coal miners don't make a great living. They have a very difficult job. It's not really the American dream. My grandmother started sewing. She would repair, do alterations to people's clothing, and eventually started making some of her own clothing and opened her own store selling women's clothing in Appalachia, and then started selling other people's clothing. She met a wholesaler and would sell his clothes at her store. And one day he told her, there's this growing town in Lexington, Kentucky, that I think your store would do really well in. And so she opened a second store in Lexington, Kentucky, which boomed, did really well. She eventually had 5 stores in 3 states. And that brought my family out of poverty, right? And so that's what I think most of us think of as the American dream. Through hard work and grit and determination, you can be better than your parents would. But this is economists saying half of economists are concerned that we don't have that as much as they don't say as much as we used to, but I think that there's an implication there. If you go back in the survey over time, a larger number used to agree with this that do lend you to that. So half, they're split. This is one of those I talk about. There's a lot of areas where economists are actually really aligned and agree. This is one they're not. They're pretty split. More of our community believe this than economists do. That this is an area that there's a lot of research right now. There's a very famous economist at Harvard, Raj Chetty, who does a lot of work on income inequality and mobility, and has gotten access to IRS data and to be able to do some really interesting research about areas of the country where there is really good mobility, areas of the country where there's not much mobility. Climate change and regulation. This one surprised me a little bit. So the statement on the left, again, this is one I don't think is econ speak. Climate change poses a major risk to the U.S. economy. I think most of us understand happening. Strong majority of economists, 85%, and even almost 80% of our community survey said yes to this. I was expecting a much lower number from this one. That this isn't a topic that I think sounds very contentious in the media, in the political world. That maybe isn't as contentious, certainly among economists, and it seems not to be as contentious among our community. And I would bet you that the survey that I distributed skewed towards older age individuals. I would bet you if we did that same survey on a younger population, that number would go up even higher. Now, when we move on to sort of the more policy implication of this, so pollution state says pollution taxes or marketable pollution permits are more efficient than emissions standards. There's some technical pieces here that may not have come out for everybody in this survey. I used to teach environmental economics at UD, and I spent a lot of time talking about pollution taxes, and I would use the phrase tradable permits. You've probably heard of cap and trade, which was interestingly a Republican idea originally, and then they decided they were against it, and they changed the phrase to cap and tax, which gave it a negative connotation. They became against it. But among economists, it's almost universally agreed that taxes or tradable permits are preferred to emissions standards. I won't go into too much detail there, but the basic idea is they are both taxes and tradable permits are market-based solutions. So you're essentially changing the price. So we're something that is creating pollution by putting a tax on it, we're making it more expensive. And so we're making it less likely that people want to buy it or harder for people to sell it. But a standard is not market-based. I'm telling you, you can only sell X amount of this. And so then there's not a market reaction to that. You're sort of putting an artificial boundary there, which is the basic idea of why economists prefer the taxes or the tradable permits. And there's many studies that would show you that this is more efficient or better for the economy to do it that way. So that isn't saying, should we have taxes? That's saying if we're gonna have some kind of regulation, should it be taxes or emission stamp? So sort of an assumption of regulation on it. The next question is not making that same assumption. It's saying the benefits of a tax on fossil fuels outweigh the economic costs. And there you see 88, almost 90% of economists, smaller number of our community agree with that, but still a slight majority. So the way that you can think about this is a pretty easy one: a tax on gasoline, right? Or if you want to think about other things, what are things that we think people should do less of? Cigarettes, alcohol, right? We have taxes on all of those things. It's a disincentive to buy it, but that comes with costs, right? If I put a tax on something, when we think about a market base, somebody wants to buy something, they've got a value that they're placing on a product, and somebody wants to sell something, they've got a cost, what it costs them to produce it. If the person's personal value exceeds the cost, then we should have a transaction, right? There should be, I should sell the product to you if it's worth more to you than it costs to me, and we both win. But if I add a tax to it, even though it's worth more to him than it cost me, that tax might not make that transaction happen. It might restrict some of our transactions, and so that creates a cost, right? That reduces total welfare. But if there's pollution, that transaction is creating a negative, we'll call it externality, that's harming all people, even people that weren't party to that transaction. So you can make an argument that even though we're reducing transactions that two people would have wanted to have, it's better for society because we've taken out the pollution that had a small negative cost to lots and lots of people. That's the basic argument, and why the economists would agree with this statement. Two other topics that I think are contentious policy conversations are minimum wage laws and health insurance. So when we look at the minimum wage, this is an area that is actually fairly contentious among economists. And I won't bore you, but there's a long history of debate among economists on the minimum wage, looking with different studies of different data in different states, where some economists find that minimum wage laws reduce employment or decrease unemployment, and other economists find that it has no impact on unemployment. And so there's this long-standing argument. Prominent economists have gotten into debates about this. So it's not surprising to me that there's much less consensus on this argument. Is slightly in favor of the textbook graph of minimum wage says that it creates unemployment. And so the majority of economists would agree with that. The empirical literature, the studies on it are conflicted. And so that's why it's not universal. And not surprisingly, our community was 50-50 split, right? So this is certainly one that people don't see eye to eye on what should we do with the minimum wage. And now when it comes to insurance, it's different. So this is another issue that's fairly polarizing that people tend to have pretty strong beliefs on. And you can see in our community, around 60% agree when the statement I have here that says universal health insurance coverage will increase economic welfare in the United States, while almost 90% of the economists agree with that statement. I think there's a couple of things to parse out here. The first is the way it's phrased. It says universal health insurance. It doesn't say universal health care, right? So they're two different things. And I imagine some people probably read this and in their head said, universal health care when they responded to the question. Maybe not, I don't know. But economists probably paid a little more attention. The wording they know matters a lot. And so when we think about insurance, there's a common problem with insurance that economists call adverse selection. And so with health insurance, the idea is if I know that I am unhealthy, I want to buy health insurance. If I think that I am healthy, maybe I don't want to buy the health insurance. It's not going to pay off them. And so if that's true, you end up with people self-selecting into the pool who wants health insurance. And who's in the pool? Mostly people that are going to have high costs. And so the health insurance companies have to charge higher rates. And so it's this bad negative spiral of rates continue to go up for a smaller pool of people, continue to go up, and then health insurance market just fails. It ceases to exist. And then the same thing happens with car insurance. And so if you think about car insurance, if I think I'm a pretty safe driver, maybe I don't want to buy car insurance. But if I know I'm wild and crazy, then I want to buy it. Or if I know that I drive, the more you drive, like the more likely you are to get into an accident. I know maybe I live 1 mile from my office, pretty close. I don't drive very far. Maybe I don't need car insurance. But we don't have this problem in the car insurance market in the United States of only people that drive a lot or think they're going to get in an accident by insurance. Vast majority of the population has car insurance. We'll do a population question here. Why is that?
Well,
You have to. It's a government policy. The government enforces that you have to buy car insurance. Except for the young kid that followed you. Right? Not very many people complain about that law. Right? Most of us are like, yeah, that's a pretty good law. If somebody hits my car, I want them to have insurance so that they can pay for the damage that they caused. But when it comes to health insurance, we view it a little bit differently, but the same principle, the same problem with the market exists, which is why economists are not saying the government should provide medical service to everybody, at least not in this question. They're simply saying, we think everybody should have health insurance. The market would function better if everybody had it. And so universal health insurance would improve welfare in the United States. So while they're aligned here, it's not full alignment with sort of thinking about healthcare policy in the United States. It's aligned with the insurance market is flawed. If everybody had it, it would be better. Not necessarily saying how we get to everybody had it. I want to finish, right? My sort of thesis with this is we're more aligned than we think. And so I wanted to finish with 3 areas where economists are universally in agreement, and our community is universally in agreement. And they actually are all in alignment in the same direction, right? So the first statement is flexible and floating exchange rates offer an effective international monetary arrangement. That's a mouthful. Some of you may have said, I don't know what the heck that is. I'll just say agree. But it at least makes my slide look good. What is a flexible and floating exchange rate? That's the dollar relative to the British pound or the yen or any other international currency. We have not fixed what our exchange rate is relative to anybody else's. They are floating. This has mostly been the case post World War II. And again, this is maybe the highest alignment of economists. It's almost 100%. Right? This is universally viewed as a positive by economists, and our community agreed with that statement. Fiscal policy has a significant stimulative impact on a less than fully deployed economy. This is another maybe a little bit of a economist speak here. Fiscal policy is the government taxing or spending, right? And so if in this case, a significant stimulative impact would mean the government either reduces taxes or increases spending, and that's going to improve the economy, increase employment. And I would say for the last 50, 60 years, the government has tried to do that. When we're in a recession, they try to increase spending and or cut taxes. When things are booming, they tend to cut back on spending, cut back on taxes, although more recently we've seen some funny movements there that's not, we're in a fully employed economy and we're cutting taxes or increasing spending. Doesn't necessarily lie. But again, 90%, over 90% of economists, almost 90% of our group here, just basically saying the government can have an impact on the economy, right? I think we'd all agree with that. We've all seen that. The recent challenge we've had with inflation, right, is combination of things, but government policy plays some role in that. And then lastly, antitrust laws should be enforced vigorously. And even more of our community agrees with that statement than the economists, but again, over 90% in both groups. So I really do think there's a lot of things we view the same. I think the political parties have an incentive to make us think that we don't agree the same, to try to pull you in one direction or the other to vote. It also sells newspapers and subscriptions and gets clicks when you say we're opposed, and there's this polarization. Some of it exists, but I think we're borderline. I would try to get to all of them, although some of you are trying to make me divisive. So I'm gonna start with what I think are some softballs or areas where I can stay that we're alive, and then I'll possibly tackle this divisive questions. What concerns do you have? The impact of AI on employment? Really good question. Hot topic. Every day somebody asks me about AI. I read something about AI, and I am going to share with you my opinion. Although I came here, I didn't want to share my opinion. I wanted to share what economists think. I'll share my opinion. This does not mean this is the right answer. This is one human's view. I don't have a crystal ball, right? This is something that's changing rapidly, and I don't know where it's going to go. When we first started thinking about AI from a university perspective, from a faculty member, most faculty member, when they saw generative AI, large language models, ChatGPT-4, was freak out, concerned that this is a tool for students to shoot, right? That was the first. Most faculty members had that reaction. How are we going to ensure academic honesty? And it's a valid concern that there's a publicly listed company called Chubb. And Chubb's business model is it buys assessments from students and sells them to other students. So if you took Professor Collier's environmental economics class, do you have any of the quizzes tests that you would sell to us? And then we sell it to future students who take Professor Collier's quiz tests, right? So as a faculty, right, I don't like that company. Within a week of ChatGPT-4's release, the Chubb stock price tanked. Why? Students don't need Chubb anymore. They got ChatGPT-4, right? And so that was a legitimate concern. And so there's a lot of the initial conversations at both campuses was how do we ensure academic honesty? I think in most places they've moved on. In the business school, the discussion we are having has moved on. That is still a concern, and it is a legitimate one. And we are still having conversations about that. But our focus is more where is AI going, and how is that going to change the future of work, and what our students need to know to be ready for their career. So this question doesn't ask me to say what jobs are going to go away or what jobs are going to grow. But when I think about that, I think for my students, you're going to have a job if you know how to use AI. You're going to be out of a job if you can't. I think most jobs are going to depend on it in some way or I hope, and I am cautiously optimistic that this is a labor augmenting technology, as economists speak for. It's going to enhance labor. us more productive. It's going to make us do our job quicker or faster or better, and not a labor replacing technology or one that's going to cease to need people. I think humans are going to be needed. If you look at what's happening in AI, they often talk about something called a hallucination, where the AI gets confused and tells you something that's wrong. There's a lot of accuracy with AI in certain areas. And so you often need a human to interpret what the AI is telling you or to guide the AI in the right direction. So there are skills on how you use AI, and we want our students to be prepared to have those skills to succeed in their careers. A common question that I get is about the accounting profession. Is our accountants going to cease to exist, right? Because AI can do your taxes for you. I don't know the answer there, but I still believe accounting will exist. They said this about accounting when calculators were invented. They said this about accounting when computers were invented. They said this about accounting when the internet came about. We still have accountants. There will be some professions that shrink. So there will be areas of the economy where employment shrinks, and there will be other areas where employment grows. Overall impact on the economy, I don't think on employment, I don't think will be that significant. I'm generally an optimist, and I think AI will have added value to the economy in general, although there certainly will be bumps in the road, and there will be people that go out of work and need to be retrained to do something different, and that is always challenging. How do economists feel about immigration? How do migrant workers affect the economy? Great question, but I believe most economists are aligned that immigration has a positive impact on the economy and that migrant workers rarely impact employment for domestic workers. There's been a number of studies on this. There was a really large one when a number of migrants came from Cuba into Miami, and there was very little to no impact on the employment rate for domestic foreign workers in Miami after that occurred. There's a very famous economic study on that. Obviously, that was many years ago, and things change. But I think most economists, not all, but I think most economists would argue that immigration has a positive impact on the economy. Oftentimes, immigrant workers are willing to do jobs that domestic workers are not willing to do. A lot of our immigrants are coming from lesser developed parts of the world, and the wages that they can earn here at low wage jobs are well above wages they could earn at high paying jobs in their home country. And there's also a lot of studies there's a lot of entrepreneurship within immigrant communities. A lot of immigrants create their own company, run their own business, and that certainly adds to value. There's probably some opposing views to what I said in here, and thankfully I'm the only one with the microphone, so we're not going to have a debate there. The issue of free trade changing dependent on whether free trade is with countries with lower wage rates and quality of life relative to the US. Decades ago, free trade with Europe was viewed more favorably. How would we change policy or a new policy to enable sustainable GDP growth with lower inflation? Okay, so two separate questions. So when we think about trade, we think about trade with lower income economies, that's generally advantageous in that there are things that can be produced in lower income economies cheaper than they can be produced in our economies, which means we can then buy them and consume them at a lower cost, assuming there's other things we can produce more efficiently than the lesser income economies. So generally we think of that as sort of higher value goods, technology that maybe we can produce, AI, microchips, other things that we can produce, consulting services that we can do with our brains, and then trade where manual labor is something maybe we don't want to do, or it can be done cheaper out of countries. So that there is actually typically value for us, even when trading with countries from lower income. I was having a conversation this morning with one of our alumni who he's an attorney, spent many years in South Asia, around the South Asia business for his company. And he teaches a class for our students on sort of economics and comparing and contrasting different economic systems across the world, mostly comparing the United States and China. And he was giving a presentation about trade. He lives in Florida to some group in Florida. And he started his presentation with sort of the moral arguments for trade. And so his moral argument is we are a very wealthy country. And what's happened over the last 40 years is poverty in the world has decreased fairly significantly. His argument is that's occurred because we've been willing to trade with these other Western developed countries. They've been able to come out of poverty and grow their economies, partly because of trade with us. If we back out of trade, if we're no longer willing to do that, what happens to those economies? Or are there other lesser developed parts of the world that haven't quite got to trade? And if we're not going to work with them, what happens? So he made an argument that there's a moral imperative for us to be engaged in trade, in addition to the economic benefits. So that there's some talk with you. Now, when you think about trade, there are winners and losers. Right? I think all countries participating in trade can benefit on the whole country benefits. But within the country, there's going to be winners and losers. So an example is Youngstown, Ohio. Right? Youngstown, Ohio produces a lot of steel, or used to produce a lot of steel. And through international trade, through some government regulations, a lot of that business dried up and went away. Or if you think about parts of North Carolina that were producing furniture, and the furniture business in the United States has dried up as we've traded with other countries who can produce that furniture cheaper. And so you have industries that in our country are going to sink. You have people that work in that industry are going to be very upset, right? Very negatively impacted personally, the families, and are going to have a negative reaction to this. And so I think when there are oftentimes people that are really opposed to trade is because of a person's banks that they have, where them or the family has been negatively impacted. But on the flip side, there's another industry domestically that typically grows, and another family who's significantly benefited from that industry being able to grow, selling to markets across the world that if we don't have trade, they don't have access to sell to those markets, and that industry may not grow. And so from my opinion is that the government can do a better job of balancing out the winners and losers, right? By taking some of the gains for the winners and repurposing that and providing opportunities to retrain and reskill individuals who were in industries that have gone away so that they have other opportunities in the industries that are there. It's difficult, it's challenging, it doesn't always work really well. And so while I am an ardent advocate for free trade, I don't espouse anybody or think less of someone who's opposed to it, because there are real costs. And I know there are real individuals who are hurting. But if you take a more macro view of it, the economy overall is better with trade. What policies could increase potential economic mobility and increase wealth distribution? So I think those are, from my opinion, those are two totally separate questions. I don't know that they're necessarily related. Obviously, if you increase economic mobility, that could on its own make the wealth distribution a little bit more equal. But I think there's other policies you can enact that don't touch economic mobility that could also increase wealth distribution. So let me start with wealth distribution. The most common way to make your wealth distribution more even is taxation. You tax individuals that you place higher tax rates on individuals who make money, and you provide subsidies or rebates to individuals that don't make as much money. The earned income tax credit is one example of that. You don't have the funds to provide for the earned income tax credit if you aren't taxing somebody else. However, on the flip side, there are costs, right? The higher marginal tax rate an individual faces, the less likely they are to want to continue working or creating economic value. And so as they stop whatever it was they were doing that was creating value, which is why they were earning money, that's a cost to the economy. So there's 100%, there's trade-offs. This is probably one of the more contentious issues is how progressive do we want our taxation system? Progressive means that you're increasing rates as you're increasing your income. And economists are fairly split there as well. I talk about it I used to talk about it in class as a difference between individuals who care more about efficiency and individuals who care more about fairness. Right? If you care more about efficiency, you want really low taxes. If you care more about fairness, you want a more equal income distribution. You care less about what that does to the economy. So there's a huge trade-off, and it's almost universally true. I would say the earned income tax credit is one that has really low economic costs. There are some, but really low, and can have significant economic benefits. And that's why most economists are strongly in favor of that. Economic mobility is a little more challenging. The work that I mentioned earlier by Raj Chetty and his team have found pockets, both the United States, where people tend to see more economic mobility, in pockets where that seems to not happen. And it's somewhat challenging to figure out what are the characteristics within those areas of why are you seeing that. But one, I think, commonly held view is education, right? Education is a way to help people change their income, and seen that with my own family. At heart, I'm an educator, so I firmly believe in the value of education. No, but I strongly believe in the power of education, and I think our current system has some challenges. We see that at the university level today. We attribute much of it to learning loss through COVID, through the pandemic, of students who weren't in school or didn't have as many touch points with their teachers. But we see students struggling more with basic reading, writing, and math. That the level of students coming to us today relative to the level 20 years ago is significantly declined. But the grades are the same or higher. Right, and so there's some challenges there, and that's I think to some degree can tie back to government policy. Right, there's always unintended consequences. These policies are really hard to get right, and so as we are trying to have more accountability in our public schools, one of the things we said to public schools was we want more of your students to graduate. Your graduation rate is low, we're going to punish you. All right, we want to encourage you to have higher graduation rates. So what's a really easy way to have higher graduation rates? Just let them all graduate. And unfortunately, I think that has happened, and that makes our job harder as we're trying to evaluate who is prepared, who's ready for the type of education we're going to provide at the University of Dayton. And I think, personally, pushing educational opportunities lower and lower has value. So if you look at some of the countries that have more equal income distributions than ours, are providing opportunities for kids at earlier ages. And that does two things, right? That's one, for some kids, it's getting them educated earlier than they otherwise would. And it's also providing opportunities for low-income parents that may not have childcare to enter the workforce, because now that childcare is being provided by government. So those are some ways. Nothing's the silver bullet that's going to fix everything, and there's always trade-offs. But that would be things that I would initially point to. So with that, we will end the evening. Thank you all for being with me tonight.